It's very interesting, and I think it probably serves a purpose. But like, what happens when the gutters, inevitably get filled with leaves and debris, and the backs up
right.
and pours right? It's going to pour right into the fascia, right?
It certainly could. You have to be very careful with that.
I don't know that that's a good idea. Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. I'm joined by Deputy Editor Matt Milham.
That's me.
And producer Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. So we're missing a crew member today.
Yeah, it's just the two of us.
I'll try not to annoy you too much.
Impossible.
Kylie's not working. Rob's not working. Justin's not working. Why are we working?
It's the day before Christmas, and neither of us have anything better to do, apparently.
I sure as heck didn't want to go to the mall.
Yeah. Oh, I went there yesterday. It was hellscape.
I don't know why people do that, but
Yeah.
I mean, if you need stuff, I guess you got to go there.
Yeah. The Danbury Fair Mall is, I got to say, I haven't been to many malls that look like they're in decent shape in
Right. It seems to
years,
be doing okay.
Yeah, it seems like it's doing all right.
There's a mall in Pittsburgh that was legendary for being enormous. The Century 3 Mall that had 100 stores in it when it was completed, and now there's like 4.
Oh, man.
It's really grim to look at the photographs of that place. It's sad.
Yeah, that's like the Hudson Valley Mall near me is mostly empty these days. I think half of it's been turned into some sort of medical establishment.
That seems to be like the only things that occupy strip malls now, right?
Yeah.
Is like urgent care and
Right.
like
Yeah, just a
X-ray
room
facilities.
full of ventilators.
It's awful.
It's a metaphor.
So I had an interesting weekend. I won't dwell on it too long, but so we've been having a slow flush in our bathroom, and that's always a concern. And I have this special gift to always imagine the worst case scenario. You may have noticed that about me. So immediately I'm assuming like the leach field is not working, the tank is backing up into the house, but all the other fixtures are working fine. So I concluded that was unlikely. So then my next scenario was, well, we've had this rash of very cold weather. Perhaps the vent stack for the bathroom is clogged up, right, with ice, as sometimes happens. So I get up on the icy roof and I discover that there's nothing in the pipe. It's fine all the way down. So my next plan of attack was I went to the basement and started, banging on the plastic drain pipe to see if there was water in it. They definitely sound different when they're full of water. So there's nothing in there. So I've concluded that it's most likely the toilet itself. And I got this bright idea right before I went to sleep. Tomorrow morning, I am going to boil a couple big pots of water, and I'm going to pour that in the toilet trap. And hopefully whatever the problem is will be dissolved by this blast of hot water. So as I'm doing this, Carol says to me, she's like, is this a good idea? Is this going to melt the wax seal on the toilet? And I said, Carol, I really don't know, but the toilet is not working. We're all going to be here for several days. This is a problem.
We're about to have some very large meals. We're going to want this thing to work.
I was like, I'm going to just try this. So I poured the first pot in, which was slightly smaller than the second, and it seemed to be helping. Like at first it was draining very slowly, but then it was draining more slowly. I was like, wow, this is working. So I got the second much larger pot of water, which probably had a couple gallons in it. We use it for cooking lobsters occasionally. And it took forever to boil this water, but then I poured it in there. And Carol was watching me do this, right? I don't know if she was worried that she would have to call 911 because I had scalded myself.
Well, was she taking video? She should have been.
Not.
Man.
So Matt knows what happened. Jeff, can you guess what happened?
Well, I'm guessing, just based on your foreshadowing, that the wax ring melted and
No, that was perfectly fine.
That was a MacGuffin.
The bowl cracked. Crack. And then like seconds later, it sounded like crack. And I was just like, she's like, that sounded really bad. I'm like, yeah, I know. She's like, I can't see that there's anything wrong with it. And I said, well, I see a hairline crack going right across the trapway. So I enlisted my son to help me swap out the toilet for a new one we got at Home Depot. And now everything is working fine. I have decided, and interestingly, we replaced the toilet that was original to the house, right? Because it wasn't performing. It would get clogged and just wasn't working. So I assumed it was just cheap because the builder who rehabbed our house did everything cheap. So I put a better toilet in, and it worked great until recently. But I think what happened is I have this very hard water, and I think the minerals start to clog the trapway. I think they settle out or precipitate out of the water until it shrinks the
reduced
cross
opening.
section of the trapway. But now everything is cool, and don't try that at home, I would say, is my advice. If your
Hot
toilet
water.
is... I did all the conventional things. I have a really good toilet snake, and we have a plunger, but like that's not going to clear mineral buildup, right?
Yeah. One thing I've done, because when I've had hot water in the past and some other houses that I've lived in, is just like dump a gallon of the strongest vinegar I can find and just leave it for as long as I can.
In the trap.
Yeah, and I had the luxury of having a couple bathrooms in my last house that had hard water like that. And yeah, I just let it sit for like a week, and then I went at it with the most aggressive sponge I could find and got my hand in. Obviously, you can't get all the way to the trap.
Yeah, you can't reach in all the way.
But at least I could get
That's
the stuff
another
that I could see in the
911 call.
front. Yeah. Yeah, unless you're like got rubber arms, you're not getting in there. But
So any of you out there listening who have familiarity with material science, I would love to hear why this happened. I can understand that if there was cold water or the toilet was very cold, like say it was outside and 0 degrees, and I poured boiling water in it, the shock would potentially crack it. But, I, in essence, heated it relatively slowly with the first batch of water. Why did it then crack? Because it's the same thing as a plate, right? It's vitreous china. It's china. Like if you put boiling water on a plate, it's not going to crack it.
yeah, except that's kind of only moving in one plane. Because it's relatively flat.
So you're thinking the geometry of it makes it, it can't expand uniformly.
I mean, I've washed glasses before in hot water. Like I didn't take it out of the freezer or anything, but like just put hot water on a glass. Actually, I may have had ice cubes in it before.
See,
but like it just shattered in my
Right.
hand. And I think it might be a similar thing.
Well, I would tell you not to try that. I came clean to the Home Depot sales rep, right, when I was getting the new toilet, and he was like totally nonplussed. Like, I don't know if I should have asked him if you heard this before, or like, are you trained not to make fun of the people who come into the store?
Yeah. The thing that I'm mad at you about is that you didn't smash this thing open to see if that was
know.
actually the problem.
Well, I'm
because you
pretty
could have really diagnosed it, and
Yes.
then you would know if you needed to, sort of like,
Maintain this.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was just a complete brain fart.
Yeah.
I should have smashed it to see what it was like in there.
yeah. Plus, you get to smash a toilet.
So Liam was hoping it would explode, right? When we tossed it into the construction and demolition debris dumpster at the landfill. But it was too full. It was full of trash, so it didn't even break.
I don't know why you didn't just epoxy that crack.
So,
Just caulk it.
at one point, Carol said to me, she's like, it doesn't even look like it's leaking. And I was like, yeah, but your toilet can't have cracks in it. That's just like, it's not going to get better.
No. But
You think I should have just like smeared
you
some
can put off the
epoxy?
inevitable.
Smeared some epoxy on the outside?
I don't know. Some caulk, something.
Yeah.
It's kind of goop it
So I
up.
was kind of,
Silicone.
the trapway is like 2 layers, right? In the toilet, and
Yeah.
the way it's molded. And I was worried it was cracked inside, and like every time you'd flush it, water would be dumping into the basement.
Yeah.
More severely cracked than what I could see.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Chances are
It's
it
not
probably was
good.
cracked
And
through both
yeah.
layers.
So, speaking of dumb things,
Yeah. I got one of my own. It feels like the Fine Woodworking podcast where they talk about their smooth moves. I had one that's...
it's all too relevant in my case, right?
Yeah. So when we bought our house, it had all of these ceiling fans all over the place. And
Everyone knows they're so attractive.
yeah, everyone knows they're so attractive. There's no central air in this house. And also there are no light switches to turn on the lights, really, in any of these rooms, pretty much, it's a light switch controls a receptacle that you would then hook a lamp into.
When is your best guess when the house was built?
Early 1950s.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've been around this, and it's prevalent in that era of home.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, most of these lights, these ceiling fans, have lights on them, and they're the only lights in some of these rooms. And I've, since in the roughly 2 years we've owned the house, I've gone through and I've added switches and actual ceiling lights in some rooms, but not all.
And so in the other cases, you control them with the pull chain, right? Like, there's no wall switch, but you turn off the fan with the chain.
With the chain, right. So in order to get light in the room, you have to walk halfway across or all the way across the room.
A dark room.
A dark room.
Yeah.
And then pull this chain. So there is what had been our bedroom is now an office. And it still had its ceiling fan in there. And, I don't use that room a ton, but I started to use it a little bit more because I'm working from home a little bit more than I was in the past. And so I was like, I'm going to change this out because this fan is gigantic. I hit my head on the stupid pull chains every time. I mean, the thing is so low.
And then that makes you jerk your head back, right? You're like, what is that?
It's just, it's not a nice thing to have in there. So I'm like, I'm going to take this out. It's easy. I went to the store, bought a light. And everybody knows exactly where this is going. I pull the fan down, I turn the breaker off first.
Yes.
Pull the fan down, put the light in. This all takes 20 minutes. As I'm putting the last little screw on the thing to secure the glass and everything in there, and I step off the ladder. I'm like, I got to make sure I turn off the switch before I hit the breaker, just in case. And then I'm like, wait a minute, there's no switch for this stupid thing. And I'm like, well, I can at least test and make sure that my electrical connections are fine. So I go downstairs and turn on the breaker. And of course, the light comes on.
So now you have a light that's on all the time.
Now I've got a light that's on all the time. And I'm like, well, I can't have that. So immediately took it out and put in a stupid little lamp holder.
Yeah, you need one of those bulb holders with the little...
Yep. Exactly. So that's what's in there now, just dangling from the ceiling. I didn't even bother to secure
it to the box. So what's the ultimate plan? Is to add a wall switch?
Yeah, so I got to add a wall switch. And there is a switch on the wall that, of course,
controls an outlet.
Goes to an outlet. And I got to, figure out a way to run cable
down to
that and over to the light, which, is normally easy in an unfinished attic, except that over this one space and one space only in the house, the previous owner built some sort of a platform on top of the framing that I have to...
For storage?
For storage. Mm-hmm. So I have to take
all that
out.
Down?
Yeah.
It's a good thing you have that cordless Sawzall.
And I had taken part of it out, actually, previously when we ripped out the ceiling in the living room when we first bought the house, because we had to redo that whole thing. And so in order to re-insulate that and do that properly, I had taken out half of that platform. Now I have to take out the other half of the platform. But of course, I put the other part back. So,
Jeff, do you have ceiling overhead lights in all of your rooms, or do you also have switched receptacles?
Switched receptacles in the bedrooms and the living room, but kitchen, family room, there's overhead.
And would you describe your house as kind of middle income? I mean, is it more upper end?
It's a little more upper end. It's junior executive kind of.
Why?
I don't know.
Why?
Mine's like starter home for sure.
Yeah.
It's like the smallest home probably in this 50s era development.
So my sister's 50s era first home had the same deal. And I think in that case it was because it had 7-foot ceilings purely as a cost saving measure. I'm guessing it was one of those World War II tract homes that are brick and all look the same in a neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So you can just run one cable down to the switch and interrupt the flow of electrons at the fixture, right? Is that what you're going to do?
Yeah, that's my plan.
A switch loop, I believe electricians call that. Have you put any overhead lights in your bedrooms or do you not want them?
Don't want them.
You have central air.
Yes.
So, and you don't miss the ceiling fan?
No.
No.
I mean, the oddest thing about the placement of the ceiling fans in most of the rooms in this house is that they're nowhere near the center. Like the one that was in the living room, I mean, we're talking about a room that's like 23 feet long or something like that and about 13 feet wide was sort of like in one corner. and I don't know exactly what it was supposed to be
Maybe
serving.
a seating area.
This house is so oddly laid out. I mean, there's a possibility that there was an idea that maybe somebody would put a table under it, but then they'd be in the way of like the closet and the doorway essentially into the hall that goes to all the bedrooms.
And a ceiling fan that doesn't blow on people doesn't do anything. That's a very common
It
misconception.
cools people, not things.
It doesn't do anything except increase the rate of evaporation from your skin, which makes you feel cooler. But if you put it and it's not blowing on you, it doesn't do anything.
Right.
It actually heats up the room, researchers have discovered, because of the electric motor.
Right. So you're just blowing that heat down.
That makes no sense.
Yeah.
I have mixed feelings about ceiling fans. I think they can make you a lot more comfortable with the right setup in the right climate, but I don't know why they're all so ugly. But the nice ones are freaking stupid expensive, hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
That's the thing. There are nice ones out there. These were not those.
Yeah. So the ones you get at the home center that we all have in our houses are pretty ugly.
Yeah.
Maybe the manufacturers will hear our show.
Send some angry emails.
Have you? Did you have any misfit projects this weekend?
Not really. I got one coming up, but that'll be fun.
What is it?
Actually, it's ceiling lights. No, just adding extra lights in my garage. But it's like a 10-foot ceiling.
Oh yeah, you need that piece of scaffolding that's in my office.
Oh, well, that'd be cool. Yeah.
Would that be tall enough? Yeah, 5 foot.
Probably, yeah. Yeah.
That's going to make it a lot easier.
Yeah, it's somewhere between 10 and 12 feet.
Just stack a bunch of plywood on top of it.
Mud buckets is what I use. Oh, boy. So should we do some questions? Oh, we have some feedback first. Sorry. Tom in South Dakota writes us, "Hey, guys, I've heard you and your contributors go on about how moist air takes more energy to heat than dry air and the implications for humidification or not. To me, this seems like a waste of time, as it really makes no difference. If we look at a 2,500 square foot house with 8-foot ceilings, we have 20,000 cubic feet of air, or about 1,600 pounds of air. Is that possible? Is air that heavy?
Yes. I have no idea.
I have no idea. So
Probably.
I'm gonna take your word on that, Tom. Using an average heat capacity for the air, you can raise the temperature of the air only by 10 degrees Fahrenheit with 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. For me, that costs 7 cents. I don't know. I mean, that's insanely cheap electricity. South Dakota must have the best electric rates in the country.
There's a lot of coal out there, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Comes from Wyoming, right? Isn't
Yeah.
that the biggest coal mine? Anyway, for comparison, my electric bill reflects 22 cents a kilowatt hour, so it's 3 times the price. So heating the air in your house is not a big deal. Now, if you want to get detailed and consider the humidity effect, yes, having water in the air requires more energy to heat. However, even very moist air has only about 1% water in it. Water has a higher heat capacity than air, but even so, the difference in heating up air of 20% relative humidity versus 60 is still in the range of 1% effect on 1 kilowatt hour. So not worth worrying about. So why do most people have to run their furnaces for a couple of hours to heat up the house in the morning? Because the hot air has to heat up the mass of the house and furnishings, which weigh thousands to thousands of times more than the air in the house, which hopefully is not also leaking outside. He concludes, there are still plenty of reasons to humidify or dehumidify, but don't drag heating or cooling costs into the rationale.
True.
So I think that was Rob who said that.
Yeah, it might have been.
And I think I called BS on that in the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, you need to have some humidity in the house just for comfort and for health. I mean, if the humidity's too low, then, I mean, you end up getting sick more often. So
and leaky houses are very dry in the wintertime, right? Because outdoor air has much less humidity than warmer indoor air, right?
yeah, well, the cold air, yeah.
I'm sorry. And so if you have a leaky house, it's going to be very dry and uncomfortable in there. So people immediately want to start boosting their humidity levels with either a humidifier on their ductwork for their forced air system, or a standalone console humidifier. And I don't think that's a good idea. I think it's a better idea to tighten up your house, and the humidity will take care of itself.
Yeah. Yeah, my house is not that tight.
Right.
But I have we've talked about it many times, the humidity problems in my house and the condensation on my windows, so we don't need to go there again. But yeah.
What do you think about this, Jeff?
Well, I mean, I have a humidifier on my ducts, and it's a lot more comfortable.
Yeah, and it has a water supply to it, and it just runs all, on a timer, or how's that work?
There's a humidistat on the cold air return.
What do you keep it at?
Pretty much as high as it will go. It's also got an outdoor temperature sensor, so it knows what's going. It's a fairly intelligent system.
And do you end up with condensation on your windows in the wintertime?
No.
Do you have very good windows?
Yeah, they're nice windows.
Okay. So he's just got a better house than us, clearly.
Oh, yeah. He's got a junior executive house.
I never knew that. This is from Dan from Southeast Connecticut. I've heard you guys talking about can lights on several occasions. A few years ago, I came across wafer LED lights. I know you have hinted at them on the podcast, but I'm not sure you realize how fantastic they are. You can literally install them anywhere, as they are a half-inch thick, the same thickness as the drywall, allowing you to have the full depth of insulation above it. I get you create a hole in the envelope, but people love the recessed lights, and I think this is a great addition. They're around $30 each, which isn't much different than an old-school recessed light housing and trim. If I'm doing a kitchen remodel for someone who wants to add lights, we don't have to worry about joist locations when figuring out the layout, because they can span over the joist when necessary. I've attached a cut sheet of the one I usually use. I love these things. I don't think there's anything to not like about them, except I haven't seen or lived with the color rendition. That's sometimes a concern with LED fixtures, especially folks who are more sensitive to that.
Yeah. You still have to cut a pretty big hole in the ceiling for these.
And then you have to seal that,
and
right?
Then you have to seal it, yeah. But, I mean, it's probably much easier to seal because you're just sealing around the perimeter of that light.
I wonder how many electricians really do that, though, because, I mean, you have to stick that in the hole with a big blob of caulk around the perimeter, because I don't see how you could seal it any other way.
Yeah, unless you're sealing from above with, the boxes that we've talked about before.
Way that an electrician is going to go up there and seal that light. There's no way. That's just not in their normal scope of work.
Right. But, I mean, also, they theoretically, I guess, produce a lot less heat to, sort of drive that stack effect that would be driving air into the space.
And the can lights, interestingly, we're going to talk a little more about the can lights later in the show, as we often do, are often ventilated to keep them cool, so they work without burning up.
Yeah.
And that, I think, drives the stack effect.
Mm-hmm.
One more comment, since I just listened to episode 213, where the question was about structural steel inspections on residential projects. My wife was a residential structural engineer in her past career, and I asked her how they handle field welds. She said they avoid them because they know most likely they won't be inspected by an independent test company, like in commercial construction. They make most field connections bolted, which can be easily done with twist-off bolts. They have a spline that snaps off at the right torque. When field welds were required, one of their engineers would inspect them and issue a field report. So interestingly, I saw these bolted connections just last week when I was in Annapolis, Maryland, because this house I was visiting has a lot of structural steel in it. And they're pretty cool. They look expensive. I didn't ask how much they cost. But they're tightened with this special impact wrench, and it actually, when they get to the specified torque, the bolt shears off and leaves just the bolt remaining where it's captured by the nut. So like it breaks off, and you can immediately tell by looking at it if it's been tightened adequately.
Pretty cool.
But this house also had a lot of welded connections, because this was a moment frame. In addition to being structural, it was resisting overturning. And I was talking to the welder who does a lot more commercial construction than residential, but he's got a certification, and they're going to weld these things up in the field, and everyone's going to accept that it's done correctly because it's someone who's trained.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a certification from the American Welding Society, and I took a quick look at their website this morning, aws.org, and there's a lot of interesting stuff on there, so check that out.
Yeah.
Matthew from Highlands, North Carolina, says, howdy. In response to the recent discussion about tooling solvent-based caulk and sealants, a few years back I had a commercial caulking company on one of my jobs doing the sealant joints between dissimilar materials, like where wood meets stone and wood met metal. These guys work in and around commercial buildings all day, every day, making caulk joints and expansion joints and laying miles of sealant beads They are total pros. While annoying them by watching them work, I noticed they all carried an old water bottle filled halfway with some strange blue liquid. They kept dipping their finger into the bottle and then smoothing out the sealant they had gunned into the various cracks. It turns out that it was Dawn dishwashing liquid, and by putting a little on their finger, it allowed them to flawlessly tool anything. I would also like to add that they masked off both sides of the joint with painter's tape to keep it neat and used backer rod to create the correct depth of sealant joint. To this day, I keep a bottle of Dawn dish soap in the tool trailer and use it to smooth OSI Quad Max effortlessly. I'm not sure what the folks at OSI would say, but it works really well. Also, great job on the podcast. I look forward to it every week. If you can, get Sean Van Dyke back on the show. We all love air sealing and exterior insulation, but the business side of things makes it possible for us to do those things. Mm-hmm. This is fantastic, right?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I mean, the many uses of Dawn. You can use it to clean like oiled up baby animals. You can use it to.
There's a shot
Max.
of I pulled off the internet and there's a little baby duck on the front of the Dawn dish soap because when oil spills, they use Dawn dish soap to clean them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so weird that they have that on the bottle and not dishes. Like, what are they really making this stuff
Ducks
for?
are way cuter than dishes.
Oh,
Come
definitely.
on, you know.
But I'm not cleaning a lot of baby ducks in my life.
So, of course, I was very curious what OSI would say about using dish soap for tooling OSI Quad Max, right? So I called their technical assistance line this morning.
Mm-hmm. And?
They're closed for the holidays.
Of course.
So, I don't know. We'll have to get back to them.
Yeah.
Maybe they're listening. It's a solvent-based sealant. I can't imagine that would affect it too much. I mean, am I wrong? But I mean, this is also a solvent, right? It cleans off crude oil from baby ducks.
Yeah.
Is that going to screw up the material?
I have no idea. I don't know enough about the chemistry.
Yeah, it clearly works to tool it, but like, is it affecting the bond or the material itself down the road? I don't know.
Yeah, I imagine as long as they're not putting it, they're not putting it between the caulk and whatever substrate they're trying to caulk to.
And does it get like foamy in the first rain when
it probably washes right off.
Yeah.
The one thing I would wonder is if it like inhibits curing.
Right. You mean because the solvents can't evaporate with the soap film on there?
Yeah.
Oh boy. I think you're onto something. Hopefully we'll talk to OSI and see what they say when they're back at work.
Yeah.
I expected to hear more about our end note in, what was it, 212, Jeff? I think so. It was the desiccated cat for all of you who are following. I asked for feedback if that was, appropriate, and I heard from Leaf on the YouTube page, and he said, "Yeah, the cat was too much." So, if you have other disgusting things that aren't as bad as the cat, we'll put those up.
Or other desiccated animals, we'll put that up too.
We have no standards. John from St. Louis writes, before discovering the FHB and the podcast, we completed a pretty major kitchen renovation which spilled into adjacent rooms. Part of the project including adding several IC-rated non-airtight can lights.
There it is.
More than I'd like to admit. This afternoon, I happened to hop into the attic and found that the underside of my roof decking, roof rafters, and some areas of insulation are damp near the top. The decking is wet enough that I'm afraid a large section of roofing may need to be replaced. Replacing the roofing and decking where necessary is unfortunate but straightforward. What I don't know is how to prevent this from happening again. Many of the cans are in locations where I cannot surround them with rigid foam boxes due to a low-slope roof and being near exterior walls. Would installing LED retrofits caulked to the ceiling eliminate enough of the air leaks, or would heat from inside the can still transfer up through attic insulation and condense on the sheathing? I'm assuming some re-insulating with blown-in cellulose would be necessary. To compound the issue, there are 3 4-inch cans in a cathedral ceiling. The cathedral portion of the attic is stuffed full of fiberglass bat. My attic is vented with a ridge vent and 2 gable vents. I do not believe my soffits are vented. Okay, a wrinkle in this question is that the 5 inches of snow we got last week that has now almost melted, I'm struggling to figure out if the wet sheathing is from leaky can lights, ice dams, or possibly the former contributing to the latter. I know removing the cans entirely is an option, but I'd like to avoid it, of course. Sorry if this is too much information, but I know Rob would be proud. Thanks for any advice you can give me. All right, so let's tackle the flat ceiling in the kitchen first before we get into the cathedral ceiling. So what do you think is going on?
I think he's got a
Leaky
lot of
can light.
air leaking through there, and it's probably condensing on the other side of the sheathing. Is that the only possibility? No.
No.
But, I mean, you followed up with him, though, right?
Yep,
And what did he say? This wasn't an issue until the can lights went in.
exactly.
So I think you figured out your problem.
I think so too. And I would try sealing them. You know, I've heard of people putting in the LED retrofits, right? Because you need to do something about the heat. If you have incandescent bulbs in there and you don't ventilate these can lights that are meant to be ventilated, you're going to start a fire. Or it's at minimum, it's not going to work. It's just going to get too hot and then it's going to turn itself off.
Yeah. But
so-
I think switching out to those lights that you
And we just
showed
is an even better solution.
would be a better solution. You could caulk that. And yeah, his question was, can you get that tight enough? Yeah. And it's not the heat that's going to condense. It's the warm air, the warm, humid air that's leaking through the hole
Yes.
that's going to be condensing on the underside of the sheathing. So,
And that's a perfect solution for both instances, right? In the cathedral and in the flat ceiling.
yeah.
So let's. There's another chapter to this that I'm excited. This is the best part in my estimation, right? I think this is a pretty straightforward question. You need to stop the air moving through the cans. You can test that, right, with a smoke pencil or a cigarette or a cigar or a IR camera, presumably.
Or just blow out a candle.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
if you get them sealed, you'll know it. The smoke won't go through anymore.
Yep.
Since my email, I've had 2 roofing contractors out to look at the area. They both suspect improper venting in the cathedral ceiling. They also both recommend ice and water shield from the overhang up over the overhangs. The cathedral ceiling had been previously stuffed with unfaced fiberglass 7 years ago during a re-roof. The roofers at that time had completed their tear-off just before a nice, hard 5-minute rain. They replaced the wet insulation throughout the attic at that time. Guessing this completely stopped any venting in the cathedral. While I believe my contractors today about the venting, I believe they are wrong about the can lights. These lights were added less than a year ago. The new ceiling penetrations have to be allowing warm air to hit the sheathing. Otherwise, wouldn't have this been a problem before now? And I think he just nailed it
Yeah.
on the head. When you add these cans, all of a sudden you have holes in your ceiling air barrier.
But the idea that just having a ridge vent with no soffit vents there was actually doing anything in the past. No.
Yeah, I mean, like, I maintain that ridge venting or roof venting with ridge and soffit vents seldom does anything because the scientist supports what I say. You need a very steep roof for that to work. You have to have equally sized soffit vents to the ridge, and it's never the same size. Sure, you can make it work, and it's very forgiving, but most roofs are not working like people think they are.
Yeah. It will take some moisture out of there if it's in there, but it's not going to really do much of anything to cool that roof deck.
Right. And the bigger problem is the air barrier with the condensation. And if you are getting ice damming, I'm betting it's going to be greatly reduced if you stop the air leakage, as you suggested earlier in the email.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about this, Jeff?
I'm kind of in a similar boat because that's what I've been working on lately is sealing my can lights.
How do you do it?
Well, fortunately I was lucky enough when I did take them apart, they're actually airtight, quote unquote, IC rated cans. So I've just been taping over any of the seams inside the can and sealing with caulk around the outside between the drywall and the cans themselves, and then using the LED fixtures and sealing those with foam around the outside of the bezel.
Interesting. So even like cans that are meant to be airtight are often installed in such a way that they're not, because no one bothers to caulk the housing to the drywall layer. And oftentimes the trim rings include gasketing material that nobody puts in. So you have to do those things and then they will perform. But if you don't, then they won't.
Yeah. Back in the venting thing, though, our previous or former copy editor here re-roofed his house, about 1.5 years ago?
Yep.
And didn't have a ridge vent, didn't have soffit vents, and the roofer really, really, really wanted to cut in a ridge vent. And I think they ended up doing that, and they ended up putting in some vents in the field of the roof, like somewhere down near the eaves, kind of.
Yep.
So that's an option if you want to try to get some more air in there. Or you can cut back the fascia, and there's sort of basically a vented drip edge
By air
that
vent.
you can get. Yeah, that sort of has like a grill on the
So
face.
what that product is very interesting, and I think it probably serves a purpose. But like, what happens when the gutters, inevitably get filled with leaves and debris, and
Then it
the
just
backs
spills
up
right-
and pours right? It's going to pour right into the fascia, right?
It certainly could. You have to be very careful with that.
I don't know that that's a good idea.
Yeah, well, I think if you have gutters, that's probably not a solution for you.
Yeah. So the roofer in Don's case, the copy editor we're talking about, his issue was that they wanted to do these soffit vents that go on the roof sheathing, and are integrated into the shingles, and it's this little projection that probably sticks up about an inch or so.
Yeah.
And for the same reason, I just think that's a bad idea. What happens when you get an ice buildup and that water starts backing up into that vent? It's going to just come right in the house.
Yeah, and I mean in that instance, it wasn't a cathedral. They
Right.
he had an open, unfinished attic, and they were like, "Oh, you need this for your shingle warranty." Well, don't even worry about the shingle warranty. They're never going to honor that anyway. But it's not going to keep the roof deck cool.
And no,
ever.
and we asked him, we were like, well, do you have any problems with your roof? Like, is the sheathing dry? And he's like, no, I don't have any trouble. He's like, I don't have any unusual ice damming. And he has a pretty low slope roof for the area, right? I want to say it's 4 or 512.
Yeah.
And yeah, why is this roofer insistent on wanting to cut his holes in his roof? And I don't know.
Yeah.
I watched the guys across the street, and forgive me, listeners, if you've heard me tell this story, but this guy lives across the street in a little cape house with a couple doghouse dormers on the front. Very typical arrangement for the area, right? And he started had a new roof put on, and I watched the can I call them roofers? Guys cutting holes in the roof and jamming these styrofoam vents in the holes they had made and trying to get it worked in between the insulation layer and the roof sheathing layer, because this roof was previously unvented. It just had the shingles right over the sheathing. Mm-hmm. And it is so much worse now that they did that work with the ice dams. It is really sad.
Yeah. It's like Homer Simpson with speed holes when he went at a car with a pickaxe.
I don't know what you're talking about, but it's funny.
Yeah.
It was sad. I was just looking at this, thinking to myself, this guy has no idea that these roofers are destroying his house. They're just they're making it worse.
Yeah.
John, proceed carefully with the roofers and their advice. I would fix the air leaks from your cans first, see if it fixes the problem. If the cathedral ceiling is not soggy, I would say leave it alone.
Wait until it comes down.
Well, I mean, if you have a good air barrier,
Yeah.
those problems largely go away
Right.
in most houses. Of course, there are problems, but it's rare.
Yeah.
The problems are really in the houses that have the wood paneling without a drywall air barrier or some kind of air barrier underneath it. Then those are very problematic because the boards leak so much more air. Barry from Petaluma, California writes, love the podcast and look forward every week for the new one to drop. I usually listen while I'm out in the shop or doing lawn work on the weekend. I also listen to the Fine Woodworking podcast and have been a subscriber to both magazines for some time. I have a million questions I would love to ask you folks, but I'll limit it to just this one in the hopes that it'll be worth your while to answer. We're in the process of a whole house remodel on a property in Petaluma, California. We purchased it a couple years ago with the intent it would become our retirement home. That time is fast approaching, and we have engaged an architect and builder for the project. Building in California is expensive. Factor in the recent wildfire and the cost of construction, it has only gone up. As a result, we have had to make some difficult trade-offs between what we would like to have and what we can afford. One of those trade-offs is the garage. The architect and builder will spec and complete the foundation for the garage, but the actual structure is for me to complete. Oh my God, that's awesome. So they do the hard, ugly part, and you get to do the fun, cool part, right?
Yeah, maybe.
You're not sold on the idea. My quandary is what kind of garage? Pole barn, prefab, metal barn kit, stick built? The building will serve as a garage for at least one car as well as my woodworking shop. I'm looking at something around 24 by 32 with half devoted to car storage and half devoted to the shop. I'm handy and have taken on different projects on my current home, earthquake retrofit, new side and rear porches, kitchen remodel, etc., but I've never taken on a complete build before. Metal buildings are generally unattractive, but they look to be inexpensive and easy to build. One company I've looked into is Versatube, which looks to be DIY capable, but again, very basic and not all that attractive. I'm also concerned about how easy it will be to finish the interior of a metal building. Alternatively, there are a couple of prefab builders locally that will either provide an entire building or assemble on your site and provide prefab wall panels for you to assemble yourself. And there are pole barns as well, although those seem to be more prevalent in the East. Patrick has talked about his pole barn in the past. What are the pros and cons of choosing that style of building? What would you folks decide to do if you had the time, but not necessarily the money? Well, that's us. What?
I don't know. I mean, if he's got nothing but time and he wants to tackle it, then
Build it.
sure.
Just build it.
Yeah.
Garages aren't hard. It's what, 4 walls. One is small.
Yeah. But I mean, a metal building in this environment makes a lot of sense because it is
'Cause of
wildfire
fire.
country.
Yeah.
When I was out there, 2 years ago, I think, to do a couple of articles with CJ Nielsen.
Yep.
I stayed in Petaluma, home of Lagunitas Brewing.
Nice.
Yeah. It's fantastic. It's a nice town. It's great out
It's
there.
a nice beer, too.
Yeah. But yeah, and I flew out the day those fires started.
Great.
Right nearby. So yeah, they got.
What'd it look like?
It looked like nothing when I saw it because it hadn't started yet.
I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I think I was already at the airport by the time I saw the news reports coming through. So yeah, and I think it was probably a couple days later that it got close to there and Roanoke Park and other towns in the area. But yeah, that's a major concern. So I think metal is probably a great option.
But the rest of the house isn't metal.
No, the rest of the house isn't metal.
So, I mean, like, is it okay to have your garage survive a wildfire, but not your house? And
I don't
is
know.
it?
I don't know what he's doing for
Yeah.
his siding on his house, but I mean there are codes there. You
Yes.
know, for
What is that
wildfire.
code? The Wildland Urban Interface?
Something like that. Yeah, we'll have to look that up and put it up on the podcast page. But yeah, there's all kinds of specific requirements, basically to limit the, embers and stuff like that from getting,
In the
into
house.
into
Right.
the house, into the soffits, whatever. But I mean, if you want to save your woodworking equipment and don't want to have to rebuild your barn, a metal building seems like a great way to go.
What I've seen of those fires is that there is absolutely nothing left. I think the metal building might not catch fire, but I think it would certainly melt. Like the structural elements would collapse.
Well, it depends on how close the trees and everything are to it. I mean, there are plenty of buildings that survived because they had a standoff from vegetation and stuff like that. Actually, most of the houses that survived that fire, that last fire a couple of years ago, a lot of them were straw bale houses because
Oh, really?
they're stucco on the outside, and almost, I think, all the ones that I saw that had survived had metal roofs.
Cool.
So it was stucco and metal roof.
I'm going to say the metal building is not DIY friendly. Like
That's the thing.
those are companies that specialize that. They have cranes and equipment to stand these up. I mean, there's also light gauge construction, and that those pieces are smaller. I think that makes a lot of sense where he's at. I'm not a big fan of those where like gauge metal where we are because of the thermal bridging problem. That takes a lot of work to make that an efficient building.
Yeah, but a company that's going to come out and erect your sort of prefab metal building is going to do it in 2 to 3 days,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
And it's going to take you at least 2 to 3 months, and you're going to end up renting or buying a bunch of equipment and tools that
Right.
you didn't realize you needed.
Yep.
And probably enlisting a lot of other people's help to get that thing up, even if it is, prefab panels or whatever. I don't know exactly what system he's looking at, but he's going to have plenty of extra work to do because you're going to want to wall off the workshop from the garage. I don't think you're going to want to condition both of those spaces.
He's in California. I mean, it's hot, but it's not cold.
That's the thing. It's
Yeah.
not cold, but he will want air conditioning probably. And so that's going to take up a lot of your time. Building whatever interior walls you need for that stuff, building your cabinets, for your shop, insulating the thing, at least the walls that are in the space that you're going to use for your shop. And that'll be enough of a project, I think, for you to bite off. And you'll be able to use the space almost immediately versus, just futzing around with it for months.
I'm gonna not go metal building. I'm gonna go wood frame building because it's easy for someone who's handy to build a wood building, right? A light wood frame building. And if you're not a framer, get some Taunton books and learn how to do wall layout, and it's going to be fun. I mean, honestly, I can't think of too many construction projects that are more satisfying than framing, right?
Yeah, well,
and it doesn't take long at all.
Well, that's the thing. The framing doesn't take long at all. It's the finish that takes forever.
Right.
And you're going to get the walls up, and you'll be like, man, that was easy. And it's going to have taken you a day, maybe 2 days, to get 4 walls up.
Right.
Another day or 2 for the roof, because I mean, if it's just a simple gable,
right,
it's going to be nothing.
And trusses are a great way to go, but you have to figure out a way to raise them yourself or get some help.
Yeah, I've never done that one man, but I can't imagine doing it.
So my uncle, who's an animal, built his own garage raising trusses by himself, but he rented a material lift, or he actually owned it because he used it in his HVAC business, because that's a great way to lift air conditioning equipment, right?
Yeah.
So it's a kind of thing that looks like a tiny forklift, and it's got cranks that you manually spin,
right,
and it raises the mast, and it's got little forks on it, and that's how he put up his trusses.
Right. So that's another equipment rental.
Yeah.
But how big was that building? Was that like 24 by 32 like this guy's got? Or?
Yeah, well, it's 24 wide, but it's deep. It's very deep.
Yeah.
I want to say it's 30 feet or more deep.
Yeah. It's not impossible.
No. And if the trusses are unworkable, rafters are super small in comparison.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's relatively easy.
And it's not hard to cut a gable rafter.
No.
Larry Hahn will teach you in like 5 minutes. Yeah. And as far as like getting a company to make panels, I don't really see that that's the hard part. Like you said, getting the sheathing up on the roof and on the walls and stuff, that's the hard part. And if you're going to sheathe the walls, physically lifting them will be challenging.
Yeah.
But I've done that by myself by panelizing my own walls. Like you make a section of wall and then you sheathe it, say it's 4 or 5 feet, and you can raise that by yourself.
Yeah.
And you just keep doing that down the structure.
Yep.
Let's do John first, because we're running out of time, and we might answer Tess's question next time when Kylie's on the show.
Yeah.
John writes, a little over a year ago, we bought a house, and although I could probably come up with 100 questions, I'll hit you guys up with one of the weirder ones. The house is a 1937 Cape located in Minneapolis. It has an unfinished basement with unusually high 8-foot ceilings, one of the things that sold us on the house. The former owner provided us with original blueprints, another perk, and they can indicate the block foundation wall is 12 inches thick and rests on 20-inch footings. The front of the house has 2 bump outs. One is for a bay window, the other is for the front entry door. On the old blueprints, the one under the entrance is marked unexcavated, and the bay doesn't have a foundation. But I quickly discovered both are in fact excavated down to the same depth at the basement floor and are supported by dedicated foundation walls. I can peek through the joists over the main basement wall into these spaces. I tried using my camera to take flash pictures in the space and got some murky photos of old building felt scraps, newspaper, liquor bottles, and rags. Hopefully no bodies. I don't know how to address these spaces. I have no idea if there's a slab in there, but I kind of doubt it. But if it is just soil, it might help account for the house's borderline radon test. Regardless of radon, they will be a source of moisture. Without proper access, I don't know how I can air seal or insulate these spaces. The finished floors above are nice original white oak and good condition, and I don't want to cut through. The 2x10 joists are 16 on center, and there's no way I can wriggle into them even if I wanted to. We will eventually finish the basement, but that is low on the list of priorities, maybe 5 to 7 years out. I could block the joist space from the main basement space with cut and cobble, but both chambers are underfinished areas of the living room, so that doesn't really get me anywhere. Also, the bay has a hose bib in it, so I need to prevent it from freezing or at least provide a drain back. I have fantasized about cutting through the block wall into these spaces and installing steel lintels, giving the axe to the space and a bigger basement to boot. I don't have a clear idea of how big a job this would be or how big I could make these openings. Would additional footings be needed for the resulting point loads? Keep in mind, both of these openings would be under-headered openings in the first floor wall above. Thoughts? Both short and long-term solutions would be appreciated. Well.
Yeah. So we can kind of see these things.
It's a mess in there. That's upsetting to me.
Yeah. So
Someone needs to clean this up.
yeah. You don't need to clean it up. You need to encapsulate it and forget about it. That's what I think.
How do you do the floor though? It's dirt.
The floor down there?
Yeah.
I don't care about it because it's not really accessible. You can't see it. Except if he
Yeah, but
sticks a
how are you
camera
going to air
through there.
seal it? Oh, you're talking.
Oh, I'm not worried about air sealing that.
No,
No, not the floor down there.
Okay.
No, I would get a bunch of bagged sand.
just dump it on there.
Just dump it in there, fill it all the way up to the top of the block wall, maybe, and then spray foam underneath the floor.
Oh, really? You're going all in, huh?
I don't know. I mean, if he's really concerned about, air sealing and insulating this space, but I don't know that you even need to worry about it at all. I mean,
Didn't you have some correspondence with
Yeah.
Was it John?
yeah, I did. And so I had asked him to send some pictures of the spaces and also asked him whether or not the floor over those areas was colder than the floor in the rest of the house. And he said essentially that it didn't seem like there was that much of a difference. So it sounds like those spaces are getting either warmed from underneath or there's not enough cold air leaking in there that it's really a problem right now.
And didn't he tell you that there was a radiator in close proximity too. So
Yeah.
that's going to help.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know that he really has a problem that needs solving.
So I have cut block walls with a 14-inch cutoff saw in my early days. There's nothing really especially difficult about it. The saw cuts like heck, but it does make a phenomenal mess. And they have them that are dry cutting, so you don't need to have a water supply and make a concrete slurry all over your basement. But the problem is most of these things are gas. They do make electric ones, but you obviously can't run a gas saw in your basement because you'll get carbon monoxide poisoning. So you'd have to use an electric one, which are slower, and they often don't have as deep a cut. So
Yeah. Why would he even want to cut back into there just to get that
to do this work,
extra 4 square feet of floor space? I don't know. I mean, what work is he going to do? I mean, he has access from the top. He can sort of, he has enough room to stick a camera in there. He has enough room to stick a large funnel to get some, scoop some sand in there if he wanted to actually fill it for some reason.
So my only concern is the vapor drive from this uncovered dirt floor, right? It's constantly going to be allowing humidity to migrate into the house, and depending
That's
on
such a low rate though, in such a tiny little space.
it's a lot of work for such a little amount of area, right? It's like.
And he says the flooring's in good shape above, so it doesn't sound like it's a problem.
It's not getting wet, right?
Yeah.
Matt and I were talking about this morning, and John, we think you need a hobby.
Yeah. I don't know. If it's not a problem now, any solution you come up with may cause unforeseen consequences.
Like the hose bib freezing, for example.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you encapsulate that in spray foam, like I suggested, you may be opening up.
They freeze.
Yeah, it may freeze.
And the house has been there since 1937. So, I mean, this has had a long time to show any problems, right? I would assume that unless you're planning significant changes to the building envelope, if this hasn't been a problem in this period of time, I can't imagine it's going to start being a problem.
Yeah.
What do you think, Jeff? This seems like something you might want to get into.
Well, I mean, I don't think he has any ready access to either to this space.
No, he'd have to cut a hole.
Yeah, I think he's just getting his hand up through
The band joist. Yeah. He's sticking his hand down the joist cavity with the camera.
Right.
Chink.
Yeah. So trying to get anything in there without having to go through the block wall is going to be a nightmare.
If you did want to cut the opening because it's headered above, I think the loads would be very low. I mean, you might have some roof load on this section of foundation, but I suspect
but
it's
a 2x2 hole is not going to be that.
right. It's just not a big enough span for it to be a big deal.
Yeah.
But it's headered, and like the joists are landing on the top of this wall, aren't they?
Yeah. So you'd have to
all that
put
header
it,
load and everything is also coming down onto the top of this block wall.
but it's going past presumably where he would cut the hole, right? The point loads would be on the
Possibly,
sides
yeah.
of it. But you need to check this out,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
And we can't tell from these photos how that little bump out is framed. Should we talk about why this was done in the first place? Like, why wasn't this part of? Why wasn't it done the way it was originally spec'd, where it was just a shorter foundation? Why did they end up going to the full depth of the basement and laying more block?
Probably because it was just easier to do it that way.
Than backfilling and compacting, and if it was overdug,
Right.
yeah.
I don't think this is very unusual.
No.
I mean, a lot of times you see these kinds of spaces, they'll kind of fill that space back up and usually top it with concrete if it's like an exterior porch area or something like that. But no, this is not an unusual condition.
Every house in Pittsburgh of a certain era had this kind of little room with a coal storage in it. You know what I mean? There was actually oftentimes
the root cellar kind of
thing. And there was a steel door on the outside that then the coal chute would be funneled into, and I'm sure,
Yeah. For your little steel smelter.
I guess the other question is the radon the motivating factor in this?
So that's a very good point, Jeff, and we haven't talked about that. If you have radon, you can't have bare soil, right? So, if the house needed to be remediated for radon, then they would probably want to address this. And I think it would be a good opportunity to buy a couple of those things that old people use to get cans out of cabinets and try and work from the hole in the joist cavity to spread plastic out and pick those things off the floor. Jeff's looking at me like, no way.
Well, I wonder if you could...
There's a hobby for you.
If you could plug up that hole and do any of those holes, sort of isolate those little chambers off from the rest of the basement and do the radon test.
But is it going to come through the frame floor, though?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean...
That's what I'm saying. Seal those off as well as you can and run the radon test. I highly doubt the amount of sort of exposed soil there. I mean, we really are talking, probably 8 to 10 square feet, something like that. I can't imagine that that alone is contributing significantly to the radon load in that house.
I wouldn't be confident enough in my knowledge of radon, but to say that, but we need someone to check.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't seen the condition of his slab. I mean, there may be cracks all over that thing. I'm sure there's no vapor barrier underneath that.
No, but the concrete does a pretty good job, right?
Yeah, it can. As long as it's not all cracked up.
Right.
Yeah.
So, John, I don't know. I'm going to put my flag in the sand. You can do the same. Don't worry about it. What do you say?
Yeah, don't worry about it. If radon is a problem, get some sort of radon mitigation system. You can just, cut up the slab, run some pipes.
And if you can pour concrete, it's not good for it to fall that far. The aggregate tends to come out of the slurry, right? It's, but I mean, maybe you could take one block out and stick a concrete chute in there. It doesn't have to be pretty. You need to stop the moisture and.
Or get one of those DIY spray foam things and just fill that whole thing, at least the floor, with spray foam, and then that'll, closed cell spray foam will also block that. I
know you could rig up an extension to one of those guns to get it. Oh my God, it sounds like a project.
Yeah.
And do it from the outside.
Yep.
Break through the side of this stoop.
But then you have to fix that. I mean, if you make the hole in the basement, you don't have to fix the hole.
Yeah.
The stoop needs replaced.
Yeah.
There's your hobby, John.
Yeah.
There's some stone masonry there.
Yep. And then you got access to that thing.
Right. And then make the hole.
And then, yep.
Well, that's a good idea. So demo the front steps, cut the hole behind it into the little bump out foundation section, do your work in there, close up the hole some means, and then redo the front steps.
Yep.
Yeah.
That sounds cheap.
Good idea, Jeff.
Also wonder about that sill.
There is no mud sill.
Right. It's right on the... So we saw an interesting detail in this house, and you folks who go to the podcast page can see it, but in lieu of anchor bolts, the builder of this house mounded up the mortar between the floor joists. Like there is
Against
like
the rim.
Against the rim, and it's like kind of spans from joist to joist, and presumably it prevents wind from pushing the house off its foundation.
Right.
Right?
And there's no anchor bolts at all and no mud sill. So nothing is tying anything to the foundation, really, other than this sort of, I guess, I don't know if you call it a keyway, but cove of concrete around the interior perimeter of the rim joist.
It's got to help, but it's not ideal. And
No.
I can't tell you how many houses I worked on that didn't have any foundation anchorage at all, no bolts or straps or anything. It's just, but Pittsburgh, it's not as risky because you don't get as many tornadoes as you do in, where was he, Minneapolis.
Minneapolis, yeah.
So, high winds are scary in the Midwest, right?
I don't know. I haven't spent that much time in Minneapolis. I think I've landed there a couple times on my way through to places, but never
Folks
stayed
out there
there
can tell me, but I'm pretty sure they get tornadoes.
Yeah, probably.
In Missouri, certainly.
Yeah, probably. I don't know. It's all flyover country.
Minnesota. We are really sounding like a bunch of East Coasters here.
Yeah. I have been to all those states. I have driven through them. I've stayed in them, but mostly camping and mostly when I was in my teens. So my recollections of these areas is not crystal clear.
Mine too. I haven't spent a lot of time there. Been to South Dakota. I think I've been to Minneapolis, like you said, for connections, but not projects. So those of you out here in the Midwest, we need to have better representation, and we need content for the magazine from the middle of the country that we don't do as well getting, right?
Yeah.
It's just not as, for whatever reason.
Yeah.
It's not intentional.
Yeah. If you're a builder out there and you want us to see your stuff, send us
Send
a
us
pic.
your stuff.
Yeah.
I think the question of, resilience in Tornado Alley is a great topic of discussion for magazine content and the podcast as well. Like, what do y'all do to keep your structures safe in high wind events?
Earth shelters, build underground.
So a lot of folks do have tornado shelters, right?
Yep.
It's like, well, that's a thing.
Yeah.
I did a pretty interesting article about, I don't know, it's been years now, wind-resistant construction, written by an engineer with the APA, Brian Redling, and I'll put that on the podcast page. But it talks about some of the very simple things you can do to make your house more wind-resistant. And it was very edifying to me because the things are not expensive and they're not that hard to do, and you can really make your house a lot safer in a tornado. And then people always say, oh, well, it's not going to survive in, F4, F5. Well, most tornadoes are not that. They're 1 and 2, and most homes don't get a direct hit.
Yeah.
So, why wouldn't you do these simple things to make your house better? We should all do them.
Insurance. That's why.
So I'm surprised insurance companies are not more proactive in driving code enforcement.
Yeah. Yes and no. They do have like the high wind stuff, like the Insurance Institute, whatever that is. I can't remember the name of it specifically, but they do the Fortified Home Program, I think is their animal.
Yep.
So
that's good research. They are truly examining how to make houses stronger in events because it's in their best interest.
Yeah.
And ours too.
Yep.
Well, this is our last chance to remind you all that we're having a Keep Craft Alive event at the International Builders Show on Wednesday, the 22nd, right, Jeff?
Yes.
From 5:30 to 8:30 at the Hard Rock Casino at the Craft and Community Bar and Grill. And we've been talking about this party that's going to be a rager. You ready?
Your shirt on.
You got your lampshade?
Yeah, I got my toga, got my lampshade. It's going to be great.
What?
Maybe it won't snow this year.
God, that was weird. I still have that video on my phone and look at it occasionally of like
Snow in Vegas.
snow squall in Vegas.
Yeah.
That was after we got out of the event, right?
Mm-hmm. That was immediately after,
Yeah.
Getting in cabs. And, it was cold.
Yeah, because it was originally supposed to be outside.
Right.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, that would have been less fun.
A lot less fun.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Matt and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us. However you're listening, it helps other folks find our podcast. And remember, if we read your question or comment on the air, I will personally send you an FHB podcast sticker. We got a new supply in because we were running low. The program is very successful.
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. Keep craft alive.